And I tend to do two different things in the session. I either do more of a meditation where we talk about non-duality, which is a lot more of a quiet session, and we just explore the nature of your perception, where you think your perception ends. And then the other thing that I do in the sessions is I also do just an investigation into your personality structure of what you believe, what you think. So maybe the person comes with a very specific problem, and I just investigate that with you, just so you can become more conscious about your unconscious patterns. And I normally do that just by asking questions, what you think to be true. And so if you feel like you really want to go into something, it's better maybe to book a session than to do it on live stream, because they get recorded and they go on the internet, and sometimes that can make you a bit vulnerable. So we can do it to an extent, but there's obviously an element of privacy that you'll want. And I love talking about this subject with people, so I love doing the sessions and talking about this with people. I don't always love it. I'm not some sadomasochist when somebody's really suffering and they bring the suffering to the table, but I also see that as part of being human, as part of this life, and I feel grateful that life uses me as an instrument to be able to explore that and see that it's not as unbearable as the person may think it is. It's part of all this, part of the opposites. And it's the same on live stream. I love sharing this message with people. I do think, though, that a lot of people's problems, and I think this makes me less popular as a speaker, aren't really, ultimately the end of suffering is the realization of non-duality, and that's the ultimate freedom. But I do think that a lot of the time what's happening in the person is the avoidance of psychological issues and having negative neural pathways, so negative thought systems and belief systems, and that leads to difficult relationships at work, difficult relationships, intimate relationships, because there's a lot of untrue beliefs, untrue ideas in the body-mind mechanism. The biggest lie ultimately is that you're a separate person, and most ideas are then built on that. So our basis is that we're somebody that exists in here. So I am Lisa, you are John. And that's the biggest mistake. And then all these ideas are based on that. But often a lot of those ideas are negative ideas. I don't know why it is, but we seem to live in a society where people pick up a lot of negative ideas about themselves and low self-esteem. I don't know if that's just the way in which such a busy society can work and function. So it's like an evolutionary thing that we need a certain amount of workers for our society, and compliance, and an easy way to get compliance is to make somebody believe that they're inadequate. Like, it's much harder to train somebody to be compliant with everything if they believe they're adequate. If you think about that logically, they'd actually, I think that society would get better production if everyone believed they were adequate. Maybe not as quick and fast production. So maybe it's more economical. But if you believe you're inadequate, then you're very likely to be more codependent and dependent on feedback and dependent on getting that praise. And while you're dependent on getting that praise, then you'll work as hard as you can in order to get that praise. Whether it be praise through having lots of money, having lots of possessions, having a beautiful girlfriend, a beautiful husband or a rich girlfriend, whether it be success in the career. And that's very painful, to be living most of your life seeking for that love in things. And what it inevitably does is it disappoints and creates a sense of depression, because you're desperately seeking for that validation, but it's completely unconscious in most people. And ultimately what you're seeking for, and this is where non-duality comes in, is love. And that's a very normal human characteristic, is to seek for love. That's the way we're set up. That's not necessarily separation, is that we're set up to get on and to be cooperative and to want to grow together and to be friendly. But then there's this added dimension where it's this comfort, this love, this absolute love, like seeking for this absolute love. And that's more of a desperate one, because when you are out of touch with the absolute, then there's always a sense of restlessness. So there's more emphasis on getting personal love and personal attention and personal gratification, which is inevitably disappointing. And so I do think that a lot of spiritual seekers that come to my talks or go to other talks could do with understanding human dynamics and understanding psychology better. And I'm not a psychologist. No way am I preaching that I am. I've learned loads about my stuff, about my conditioning, so I can give advice based on that. But I'm not a trained psychologist. So that's something that you have to look into and explore yourself. One thing that I do in sessions that I've been doing more recently, and maybe somebody can phone in today and I can work through it with them, is just asking questions so people become more conscious about what they're doing. You know, most people don't know what they want, and that's fundamental to being a healthy, balanced human, is knowing what you want. If you don't know what you want, then you're going to get swayed by everybody else's wants and desires and expectations of you. And that's huge, not knowing what you want. Like now, listening to this talk, do you know what you want from this talk? Or are you just passively listening and going with the flow, which fits in with the idea of spirituality? Like, what is it you want from this talk? Now, you might say enlightenment, and that's great. That's what I used to reply when I used to get asked these things. When I was a Buddhist, I used to reply, I want enlightenment, and they all used to laugh. And I'd be like, what are you laughing at? Why else are you here? And another would be like a bit of peace of mind. So if you, if you reply enlightenment, that's fair enough. But what does that mean to you? What does this idea of enlightenment mean to you? So I used to be very airy-fairy about that, and then one teacher told me to actually describe what it was. Like, what did it feel like? What does it feel like, this idea of enlightenment? Because if you're going to put so much energy in it and so dedicate so much time, surely you should be specific about what it is. I mean, is it ultimate pleasure? Is it to be in a constant state of orgasm? Is it to get my attention? I'm sure that is some people's motivation, or to get my appreciation. Is it to get a feeling of being worthy? Is it because you want a better life? And this is just answering it now. I'm not asking you to answer it for what it's going to be like in 10 minutes time or next year. Just now, What is it that you want to feel more relaxed? You see, we often have this belief or this idea, like I want enlightenment, and we don't really know what it is, so we believe in this idea of enlightenment, and we go after it, and we kind of forget why we wanted it in the first place, and then we kind of get into, well, there is no one, so that doesn't matter, and just ignore all human dynamics. But it's super important on the human level to understand what you want. If you don't understand what you want, then society will just drag you through life, and you'll end up doing lots of things that you don't want. Sometimes we all have to do things we don't want, but if you don't know what you want, then you'll end up living for other people, which is okay as well. So maybe one thing you could do after this talk, or maybe you could do it now, is list down 3 things that you want in your life right now, or 3 things that you want in this talk. I've spoken about this many times before, and I'm sure I repeat myself lots, but when I was taught playwriting, what I was taught is all you need to work out is what people want and what they do to get it. And sometimes those characters aren't clear about what they want, so it's messy. And you're allowed to have what you want. Like what voice is it that says that you have to be self-sacrificing? That you have to not get what you want? That's very convenient for society to teach you that. Then that means you'll work for this society. And we all have wants. I have wants. I have wants in all my interactions. And I was never really sure why on the human level I did these talks. On the absolute level, they just happen. The talking just happens, but it happens through a pattern. And I wasn't really sure what pattern it was of Lisa that did these talks. And then last retreat, I think it was, it became so obvious. I kind of knew this already, and I'd thought about lots of different reasons why I did it. Like I love talking about the non-duality side, and I find humans fascinating, so I love the investigation of certain dynamics. I find it sad people suffering, but I also love it when I see people change. So when I see people learn from it and grow. And when I did this retreat, people, at the end of the session, at the end of the retreat, we did a circle, and I received lots of compliments about the way that I held the retreat, or what I'd done, or what people liked or didn't like. It just ended up that way, more so than normal. Maybe I don't do the circles like I did them, but for some reason I got lots of compliments. And when I got the compliments, it was nice, but it didn't really do that much. It was nice in the sense of I could hear what worked or what touched people, but a sense of like me feeling proud of myself or anything like that, that didn't happen. Like I didn't feel any of that. But then some people talked about a change that happened in them, or some form of awakening, or an opening, or just a recognition of a pattern that they'd been unconscious of. And when people talked about the change and that it had helped them in some way, my heart just sung. When, on the human level, when there was change, or there was a change for the positive, it just really made my heart sing. It really touched me. And I wasn't ever as clear. I knew that I liked that, but I was never as clear. Like out of all the things that people said at the end of it, I found that the most touching thing. That beats every part of the job for me. And I was conditioned by lots of non-duality, and almost it's like on the human level you're not allowed to have wants or or desires in non-duality, which isn't true at all. That's talking from the absolute level. On the human level, you always have wants and desires, whether it be a want for a cookie, whether it be a want to make your partner feel happy, whether it be a want to walk your dog or do the taxes or make a hot water bottle or tell your neighbor what a great neighbor they are because you want them to feel good, or to get on with someone, or to be nice, or to make someone a cup of tea. There are always wants on the human level, and your wants are dependent on the way that you've been conditioned and your genetics. And these are always changing. And you can always update them. The more that you become conscious of it, you can always change and update your way of being, but you're always going to have your imprint. Like, I'm not going to suddenly just become like an Indian Bollywood star or something. Like, I'm going to tend to have this English reserved, like my parents. But the more that you become conscious of your patterning and the way that you work and your neural pathways and your thought processes, the more likely they are to change and to lighten up and to become more see-through, and there's the possibility for change. And that's not somebody's doing. So you hear me talk about that and you think that's somebody's doing. But that one that's becoming conscious of those neural pathways and of the personality structure is also happening. You believe that's who you are, but that's another functioning of this complicated robot. So that's that one that's updating the system and learning about itself is not the experiencer. It's being experienced. But most people, the energy is caught in that person, believing that's who they are. And when there's a belief that's who you are, everything about yourself becomes overly important. You've forgotten the absolute level of life. The who you are is nothing. You're not really your conditioning. If you believed, I don't think there can be any freedom, no matter how balanced you are as a personality structure, if you just solely believe that's who you are. Because you're going to have positive thoughts and you're going to have negative thoughts. You're going to do good things and you're going to do bad things. And when you're just identified with that person, that's too overwhelming, the negative side of life. There can't be an acceptance. You're always going to be striving to create positivity and pleasure. When there's a realization that's ultimately not who you are, it's like there's a forgiveness of the human on the human level. And there's a movement back to what you are, because we are animals, and, you know, all of us want the biggest piece of cake with the cherry on top. And sometimes, though, we're programmed that we want our partner to have it, or we want someone else to have it, but only because it gives us pleasure. We are self-interested animals with, what's that word? That nice, beautiful, long word. That are altruistic, and this altruistic part, though, is formed in the fact that it gives us pleasure. But we do have that as an animal, which is beautiful, and I love it. I'm so glad that we're not like tigers or something. I'm so glad that we're social creatures, or social animals.